Cool. So yeah, we'll just go over this step by step. If you have questions, please feel free to stop me. We can talk through whatever. And off the bat, we have this project, right? We have the demo here that shows like what we need to do with this suites vendor. We have the README, and we can work through one by one. If I don't see your comment, I'll check here periodically, but if I don't see it, feel free just to unmute and ask. So before we begin, let's do this. It says setup. Before you begin coding your solution, cd into it, which we did, and then run bundle install, which we'll do now. It says run bundle install, Rails DB migrate, Rails DB seed. One thing that's cool, I don't know if you guys have noticed, but sometimes I'll run multiple programs. You can just use the AND operator here in the terminal and do like multiple things if you want. Not necessary, but if you see me doing it, just know that. Cool. So now it says to run Rails S, but I'm just going to go and run Rails C because I just want to make sure I actually did see something. So I'm dealing with suites, vendors, and vendor suites. So if I do like a vendor.all, I have my vendors. And suite.all, I have that as well, which is cool. Let's exit and let's continue forward. So it says we can run Rails S. Okay, well, I think it's probably good practice for us to read through and understand what we want to do in this whole thing. And it says this application tracks vendors who sell suites. There are 3 models in the domain: suites, vendors, and a join model, vendor suites. Vendors can have many suites. Okay, cool. Now I'm starting to get into some has many stuff, right? So vendors can have many suites. All right. Suites can be sold by many vendors. So that sounds like what kind of relationship?
Many to many.
Yeah, thanks for the monotonous zombie-like tone, which I think implies the fact that like, hey, this stuff that was really complicated last mod is now more simple. That like I feel insulted that you're asking me. That's a good point to be at. But it's a many to many, right? And the next sentence even tells us the join model vendor suite connects one suite to one vendor. So let's just quickly write that out. I have vendor has many vendor suites, right? And has many suites through vendor suites. Cool. So that does not seem too tough, and we've already got our model domain, which is great. And again, be advised, like you might always have it not this clean cut of saying like this can be sold by many and this can have many. You might have like different terminology, like synonyms in here, right? Like saying instead of a suite can be sold by many vendors, you might say like vendors can sell more than one suite, right? And you might see this in a code challenge and instinctively you're like, that sounds like many to many, but then your brain might think, but maybe it's not. Maybe it's this new thing I haven't learned yet, and now I'm panicking, and now I'm just going to try a whole bunch of stuff. This happens, especially with model domains. Like, we're not trying to trick you. There just might be different words used. Go with your gut. If you think it's going to be a many to many, and it sounds like many to many, and then you try to convince yourself out of it, like it's probably just a many to many, right? Sweet. So we have this vendor, our model domain set up. Now it tells us what we already have. The starter code has migrations, models, and seed data for the initial suite and vendor models. There are also routes, controllers, and views for the suite and index pages. So it sounds like suite and vendor are like kind of taken care of for the most part. Once you have followed the setup instructions above, visiting /vendors route will display all of the vendors. Similarly, visiting /suites will list all of the suites. Okay, well let's try it out. Let's not take their word for it. Let's say Rails S, and then let's go here and say localhost /vendors. Hey, they were being truthful, right? It does indeed list all of the vendors and suites. And that lists all of the suites. Cool. All right, let's move forward, and it shows our schema. This is marked down, so it's kind of hard to read in the README. I might honestly work off of the actual GitHub page in the browser. It says update the code of the application to meet the following deliverables. Follow RESTful. Yep.
In Atom, if you double click the README, you can look at it in Markdown Preview.
Oh, really? Double click here?
If you like double tap with 2-finger tap on the trackpad to like left click, I think it is.
Oh, left click it. Okay.
Yeah.
Ooh, I never knew this.
Yeah, and then, well, I don't know why yours failed there, but try exiting out of that. It should work. Sorry, I don't want to derail.
Oh, no, that's okay.
I do the same thing because it looks great on my screen. Otherwise, this looks like trash, and I hate it.
Yeah. I might... interesting. I might not have a package installed. Maybe I would have to install something. Oh, no, there we go. Oh, cool. Oh, let's look at this instead. Thank you for that. TIL, huh? That's very handy. Awesome. And then I just can't mark anything down here, which is fine. I actually added, that was probably the only thing I needed. Cool. So now we have the suite vendor, and it says, read through these deliverables carefully, blah, 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 tackle them one by one. All right. So the first thing I have, it says, update the schema and models to add vendor suite model. It should have a vendor, a suite, and a price. So it gives us the attributes of this vendor suite model, which we don't have. Very cool. Well, I know I don't have a migration for vendor suite, and I don't have a model, and I don't have a controller. Okay. I don't have a model, a controller, and do I have any? I don't have any views for it. All right. So what would be like an appropriate generator here if I wanted to use a generator? I can do it myself. It seems like it. That seems like an area if I try to do it myself, I'm gonna lose a lot of time in the code challenge. Where maybe this is an area. This is the point where I can get comfortable using generators and try and save 15 minutes that I'll have to spend on other stuff. So what's a generator that can help me create a controller, a model, migrations, maybe some views? I have Rails G model. Yeah, Rails G model is definitely Rails G migration. Okay, so I think Rails G migration will just give me a migration. Rails G model would give me a model and the migration. Is there one
resource?
Yeah, I could use like a Rails G resource. And you know what? I might not even use my controller, or I might not even use my views, but I could just create them right now. I'm in a time crunch. I don't really care about creating extra stuff. If it happens, it happens. I just want to hit these deliverables, right?
Oh, looks like a beefy boy.
What's that?
Your beer looks beefy.
Oh, it's pretty good. It's just a wheat beer, a Hacker Shore. So I would probably use either model, which would give me my migration and a model. But honestly, I'm probably just going to go for it all and use resource, Rails G resource, right? And this is called a vendor suite. Now a question I have is, okay, with resources, the naming, do I name it vendor undercase, lowercase, underscore suite, lowercase, or do I name it capital V, right? Like, I'm a little uncertain. So I would just probably do like a Rails G resource and go to the documentation and just look. I can look at an example. Yeah, an example's fine. I usually just go to the documentation and just look at the first thing. But I look here. Oh, okay. It looks like it's capitalized, right? Like a class, how I'd create it. So I'm just going to go and follow that. I can even be more specific here and be like, all right, I want to create this resource, and I want to do everything in the terminal and have it created with this attribute, this attribute, this attribute, this attribute. That's a little beyond where for me, that would take me more time to look up how to do that than just to quickly add the resource and do it myself, right? And that's usually, this is the route I take. I just say like Rails G resource, vendor suite. And look at it created all of this stuff for us. It created a migration. It created a model, it created a controller, it created views. So I can go in here now and just with that simple thing, I have my controller. Might not need to use it, but I have it. I have my model here. I have migration. Look at this. I have a migration in my migration folder already set up, and I can just fill in what I want. And it tells me what I want, right? it says a vendor, a suite, and a price. Cool. All right, well, let's just go into my migration. T.integer vendor ID, T.integer vendor, a suite ID, and then T.integer price. Any questions at this point? Did anyone...
how do you know that you're going to have like vendor ID and not like vendor name?
Oh, because the README just told me. It says right... let me go back to this. The README says right here. It gives me in the instruction. It says update the schema to add vendor suite model. It should have a vendor, a suite, and a price. And it says an integer data type for this column. We'll treat the number...
Well, that's for price, I guess. I was wondering how you jump to integer data type for vendor and suite also.
Oh, okay. Well, what is vendor suite? It tells us up here as well, too, right?
Oh, it's the join table.
It's the join table. So I know there's at least two things that vendor suite will hold. It will hold the vendor ID and the suite ID, right? And even though this didn't say a vendor ID or a suite ID, I'm just making that assumption. I mean, that's not even an assumption at this point. That just tells me, okay, these are the things that it's listing a vendor. I can put a vendor ID. Do I have to make it an integer? No, I could do, t.resource and just say vendor, right? And give the whole instance. That works the same way. But I think we're, as a group, more comfortable using the ID and the integer. Is that correct?
That makes sense. I forgot about that.
Is .resource used often?
I mean, I would consider the source of who you're asking. You're asking someone that has spent 2 years or over a year and a half in the Flatiron program, where we teach starting off with integer, right? So it could be. I just don't know. I don't have the industry experience to know what multiple companies would use with Rails.
Sure.
So yeah, I don't. In industry, is it used often? I'm not sure. I know it works the same. You can use either, right? So there's probably a little more functionality with the resource aspect of it. Who knows though? I don't think it's really that big of a.
It doesn't make that big of a difference when you're doing associations, and connecting. It doesn't make the associations really that much easier.
Yeah, it works the same way. I would say that's a higher level question than the problems that we have to deal with as students here, and probably the problems you even have to deal with moving into your first role. That would probably be something that is spec'd out by the documentation, by the good practices documentation of your company. They might prefer one thing, they might prefer another.
Okay.
Yep. Cool. So one question for you guys: how many people spent more than 15-20 minutes getting to this spot? And my question is, did you guys try to build this out yourself initially?
I think I would have.
Yeah, and that's fine, but just know, like, this might be an area where you can use if you get comfortable with a generator, you can just use the generator and save yourself a bunch of time, right? Save yourself 15 or 20 minutes. Yeah, Rails G is the G for sure. All you got to remember is Rails G, because that would pop up. If I just type in Rails G, it will give me all of the available generators, right? And typically the only 3 you're going to be using, 4, but with the code challenge, you might just think like, okay, model will give you the model and the migration. Migration will just give you the migration. Resource and controller will just give you the controller. I think a few other documents. It might give you the views as well. But resource gives you kind of everything that you guys have been working with to build out something. So when in doubt, I would say for tomorrow, just use resource. If you don't ever use your controller, that's fine if it exists. It's not going to be an issue. All right, so let's move forward. We have this. We've completed our migration. We haven't completed the migration, but we've completed the migration file. So moving forward, it says it wants to start with this vendor suite stuff. So we probably have to do our migration, right? So let's run through and do that. Where did my terminal go? I must have X'd out of it. Okay. So yeah, let's Rails DB migrate. Cool. Now we have, let's check our schema. Let's confirm. Now we have our vendor suites. Vendor ID, suite ID, price. So at this point, I'd probably also want to move forward with establishing my associations and then writing a few creating a few instances to test that out. So I already know what my associations are, right? I wrote that in my README. It's right here. So let's start with vendor. So first, how does vendor relate to these other two models? Well, first, it's the vendor suite, right? And that's a vendor has many vendor suites. So let's write that one. And if you're wondering, how do you know if it's lowercase or uppercase? The only time you'll use uppercase like this is when you're talking about that class to call like class methods, right? Like if I say vendor.all, every other time, if you're not calling a method on the class, right? Like vendor.create, every other time it's going to be in the snake case here. All right, so I have that aspect done. Now how does it relate to suite? Well, a vendor has many suites through vendor suites. All right, this is all stuff you should be pretty comfortable. This is mostly mod 1 stuff. All right, we're going to vendor. Well, now it's just the flip side for suite. Right? We go from this side. Suite has many vendor suites. Suite has many vendors through vendor suites. All right, let's now move to vendor suite and say belongs to suite, right? Belongs to vendor. Cool, so we just did this. Now we set our relationships up, right? I feel confident, but now let's check because maybe I made a mistake. Maybe I spelled something wrong. Maybe I left off a letter or something, right? Who knows? So let's go in, let's seed some vendor suites, and let's go into the console and let's call these methods to make sure they work. It's going to prevent a lot of headache down the line if we indeed did make a mistake. So one quick way to create a bunch of vendor suites is they already created a bunch of vendors, a bunch of suites. I can do like a 10 times do. And then I can call vendor suite dot create. Right, and I can pass in from my suite. It takes a suite ID and it takes a vendor. I can do suite ID and pass in a number, right? Like suite ID like 4, 3, or whatever. Or you can do a suite ID and pass an entire instance of suite. Excuse me. You can say suite and pass an entire instance in. So I don't care which suite is associated with this. It can be a random one for all I care. So I can just quickly set up and say suite.all, which gives me the entire array of suites, and I can call the sample method on this. And what does the sample method do? Well, let's hop in IRB, and if I have test equal 1 f smiley face, right? And then I call .sample on it, test.sample. It just gives me a random one each time I call it, right? It just gives me a random element of that array, which is pretty nice. So if I call sample on suite.all is all of the instances of suites, dot sample will just give me a random instance. So I can just do that and then do the same thing for vendor. Okay, and then for price, I don't really care what the price is. I know I want like a 2-digit number because it's going to be what it is in cents. Not that that's important, but if I want to follow along how it said, I could just put them all as 5 cents, but I probably want these different. I can use the rand method, and then I can just pass in 1 to 100. And like, what does this do? What is rand? Well, random will just give you a random number of whatever you put in as arguments. So I can use a spread operator on rand, and I get like 91, 29, 2, 4. And you might ask, okay, well, what is the difference between like 2 dots and 3 dots? And the difference is, if it's 3 dots, I believe it includes the number 100. I could be wrong. Let's change this to 1 to 10 and see if we get a 10 ever. Okay, let's change it to 2 dots and see if we ever get a 10. Okay, so I was incorrect. If it's 2 dots, it means it's going to include this number. If it's 3 dots, it means it's not going to include this number. It would be the one before. So this would give me a number between 1 and 9. This would give me a number between 1 and 10. If I want a number between 1 and 100, or it could be 1 as well, then I'll do the 3 dots here. So it's just going to give me a random number each time. Any questions on the seeding of this? Cool. All right. Also, I probably want to do a vendor suite.destroy up here, just so I don't have all these old pieces of data in my database if I seed a few different times. So now I can run Rails DB seed. Things work good. Let's hop into our console and let's try these out. So if I look at like my vendor suite.first, right, I can see I have vendors 8, suite 7, price is 21. That looks fine. So let's go and call some of these methods. I should be able to say vendor suite.first, which is the first instance of a vendor suite, or I could even set it to a variable right now, vs equals, and now I can say like vs.vendor, and it should get something, and I get the vendor associated with that. What if I do like vs.suite? I get the suite associated with that. Cool, cool. Now what if I do, you know what? What if I go and find my first suite? So I say like s equals suite.first. So I should be able to say s.vendor suite. Vendor suites, excuse me, to give me all the vendor suite instances associated with that. And I get those all. Very cool. So I can also call s.suites. Ooh, interesting. Undefined method suites. What do you think happened? What would you guys do if you came to this spot?
Are you going to call suites on one instance of a suite?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, suites. I'm dealing with a suite. I called that wrong. My mistake. It would be vendors. S.vendors. Oh, but interesting. Now we're in panic mode, right? Because now I check what was my S here? What did I assign it to? I assigned it to the first suite. Okay. But why couldn't I call S.vendors if there's that many to many?
You wrote seats.
Ooh, Ruben's found it, right? I intentionally kind of shown how, like, hey, I probably just had a typo, right? And typos happen all the time. But by testing it right after, before I move forward to the rest of my program, I can help give myself confidence that I have a fully working set model domain that have no typos, right? But I even get this error that says, could not find the association vendor_seats in the model seat.
Wait, where did you type in seats?
That's a good point. Where do you think I made this error? How many steps have we taken prior to testing this?
Oh no, I'm following along. I didn't make that mistake. Sorry.
No, for sure you didn't, because
Well, you.
How many possible areas do we have to have made this error?
Well, it says in model suite.
Yeah, in the model suite, right? All we did was set up our association, so I'm assuming if I go in suite, I probably, indeed, left out a W. Right?
Did you do that on purpose?
I did, but no one caught me.
Wow.
But that's the thing. Do you see how, like, right when we created our associations, we then we made instances and we tested every one of them. So this stuff like this does not kick our ass down the road, because if this happens and we don't test and we start building views and we start building forms and we start creating stuff, and finally we go to a show page of vendors, or excuse me, we go to a show page of suites and we try to display all the suite.vendor suites or all the suite.vendors, and then we hit this error, I don't know where I did that. I'm probably going to think it's probably something on the show page. I'm going to rearrange my form. I'm going to dig through all of that, and I'm probably going to lose a lot of time and make my program worse. So I highly recommend you guys doing this type of stuff, right? We especially for model domains. Yeah, like Zoe had mentioned, like that's what happened to her, right? Like it's very natural because you move forward, you think you're on a time crunch and you don't properly plan for this. Like you think you're saving time by not checking, but you're actually losing a lot of time down the road because you're probably going to hit an issue. Whereas here, we only did this one thing. We only set up our associations. So I know I made this error. It has to be my associations. And if I also take the time like Rubens did to read through this error, it tells me where this is. It says in model suite. And so I knew where to look and see what issue I had. Right? And I harp on that a lot because it's extremely important, and it's one of the good practices you can be as a coder. It's not because people that like I'm not able to complete this faster or more with less errors because I had this instinctive knowledge of code and memorize everything, but it's you just constantly check stuff because every time, then if you hit an error, you know where that error is at. You've reduced the realm of possibility of where it could be. So we can move from that, but I just hope you guys take it as something you do tomorrow, especially with the model associations. As soon as you set your associations up, build out some seeds, hop into your console, and try it every single way, right? And I might have made another error that wasn't intentional, so I'm going to try it from the other way. So we have s.vendors. Let's do a vendor. Vendor 1 equals vendor.first, and I can do the same thing and say vendor 1 dot vendor suite or vendor suites. I have vendor 1 dot vendor suites. That vendor might not have any, but I didn't get an error, which is good. So let's make a vendor 2. Because it's just random of how the vendor suites get assigned, it might have not hit that one. Vendor 2 equals vendor.2. Second. Okay, and then we can call vendor 2 dot vendor suites. I spelled it wrong. All right, that one does. So I have one there, and then I should have vendor 2 dot suites, and try it from this way. And I have that as well. So now I have confidence. I tried it from both sides. I tried it from the vendor. I looked to vendor suites and suites. I tried it from suite, looked to vendor suites and vendors, and then I also tried it from the vendor suites and looked from vendor and then from suite. So I know my model domain is completely good, right? No issues on that side. So no matter what, moving forward now, no matter what happens, I'm not going to have an issue with my model domain. I'm all set there. Wow, okay. I'm lagging in time here. Cool, so now we can move forward. Let's go back to the README. We've done this, and it says, okay, so it says this vendor suite create form. And we get our first like big thing, right? A user should be able to visit a page to link to a vendor and a suite. The form should let them choose a vendor from a select dropdown, choose a suite from a select dropdown, enter a price, and submit the form. So what does this sound like? What type of form? What would this new form be for? What model?
The vendor. is the trick with the vendor suite?
So we have vendor and vendor suite. Let's look at it. So vendor, what is the name of number 2? That's a pretty big key.
Oh, vendor suite.
Yeah, it's a create form for our vendor suite instance, right? And it says a user should be able to visit a page and link a vendor and a suite, right? And it even says submit the form to create a vendor suite. So right now I know in my head, okay, I want to have a vendor suite new. I need to create a vendor suite. So the first thing I'm going to do is say, all right, so this would be localhost / vendor suites / new, right? We can even try going there right now.
Nothing's gonna show up.
And I don't have my server running. Cool. It says the action new could not be found for vendor suites controller. So this actually tells me something. This tells me I have something. There's something I don't need to do at this point that must be set up for me. And what is that?
Is the route already there?
Yeah, I assume the route's already there because I didn't get a route error. And if I look, oh, look at resources, vendor suites. They already gave me all of the vendor suite resources. I already have all 7 routes for vendor suites, so I don't actually have to do that.
Is that again because we did Rails G resources?
Actually, I think it is, honestly. I don't know if this was on the starter code. I assume it wasn't because there wasn't anything with vendor suites. So look at Rails G resources is looking out for me here. Yeah, you're right. It is Daniel. And they also gave me all my resources. So I don't have to worry about a route, but I do have, what don't I have?
You need the new method in the vendor suite.
Exactly.
Controller.
So I go into my vendor suites controller and I can create my new method, def new end. And that's all I'm going to do for right now, right? I just have this thing. And if I refresh, did I put it in the right one? I did. Maybe I gotta. Did not save it. Let me see.
Is your server running still?
Oh, here we go. It just took a little while. I get a different error though, right? And I get this error that says I'm missing a template. And every time you see that word template, and especially a long error, but I see the word template, this tells me it's a view. I don't have my view for this. Rails is trying to implicitly render my new template in my vendor suites folder inside of my views folder, and I don't have a new template in there. So I go to views, I go to vendor suites, which is again created for me by my Rails G resource, and now I just create my new.html.erb. Cool. And now I can just say like h1 vendor suite new, just to give myself an idea if I hit it. And I have. So that's working out. So now I can go on to the form, right? And what's the Rails helper we've been accustomed to working with for forms? Form 4. And we have to give it an argument of what? The instance that we want this to be for. So with my new in my controller, I actually have to provide that. We have to set a variable of @vendor suite. You know, it's just one, it's singular, and I can just say vendor suite dot new. This helps build my form 4, so it knows what to call the key value pair inside the params.
Hey Nick.
Yep.
I just thought of this. Why can't we do vendor suite dot new in place of that in the form?
We can do that. We definitely can. I can put this here. But,
Yeah.
But what is the issue here? It's not wrong, I would say, but we're breaking convention, right?
Yeah.
Because what is this? We're in our view. This is and we're talking to the model. So this is like the customer going back in the kitchen and talking to the chef. Right.
Okay.
Right? You're kind of breaking MVC convention by doing so. So anytime you call classes inside of your view, you're breaking convention, and you should actually set that as a variable inside your controller, because it's not the customer's responsibility or privilege to be able to talk to the chef. They talk to the waiter, who then relays that information to the chef. Right?
Gotcha.
Yep. So that's the only thing.
Is that the only reason?
Yeah, that's the only reason. You're just breaking convention. All right, so I have this vendor suite variable here, and now in my form, I can include that at vendor suite. Okay, do f, and then I have my end. And now, what do we need? We need vendor, the suite, and the price. Let's just start with the price. I'm going to use the f.label tag, give it price. And I'm going to use the f dot. Let's just put text area for. Let's just say text area for now, and give it price. Let's see what this looks like. I have to have an underscore, right? So I have this. That looks weird. I noticed off the hand I'm missing one thing. What is that?
Submit.
Yeah, I don't have a button. Put that in there now. All right, but this is weird because like that's weird to put a price in here. Like 99, that looks odd, right? Like that doesn't seem good. Text area is not the best. Okay, well what if we narrow it down and say like, text field? All right, well let's try that. That's better, but like 54. Like what if I like try to create something with that, right? That's probably gonna break my stuff. What would be the ideal Rails helper input to use? Don't think too hard. Oh, we might have a comment.
We have comments.
Yeah, thanks, Claude. Yeah, number field. Well, I don't think collection works here because we just want a number, right? We don't. We're just caring about like a price input we get from the user. Yeah. So we just care about numbers. So like number field would be better here. Text field wouldn't be wrong, but we're kind of opening ourselves up for some abuse from the users there. Let's do number field and see what that looks like. And when in doubt, if you're ever in question, be like, hey, number Rails form 4. That would be an ideal Google search. I assume doing something like that would give me, if there is something for that. So like number form 4, even that might be sufficient. And, yeah, I had this come up. Number field, right? Number field comes up. Number field, number field. So when in doubt, you can always just look something up. All right, let's save this. Let's refresh. And that looks the same, but now you'll notice if I hover over, I get this little up and down thing that actually controls what that is. And it also prevents me from typing anything other than E, because E is a number, right? Euler's number, I think. Euler's? I think it's Euler. I think it looks like Euler. I don't know. Anyways, but I can type numbers. So that seems a little better, right? Now let's move on to the harder stuff, which is a drop down of all of the suites. Let's just start with suites at this point. What would I want to use here?
Now I'm going to use collection select.
A collection select. Very good. A collection select. Now, here's a key thing. I'm not going to promise you tomorrow that this is going to be the same. I almost would want to promise that it's not going to be the same, but I don't know for sure. You and your projects have probably dealt with something where you're not creating the joiner instance in a form, but you're creating an instance that is associated with the joiner and also having to create a joiner at the same time. Is anyone in that has anyone done that yet?
I don't understand what you just said.
So here is kind of unique because we're creating the joiner instance, right? But usually you're not going to create often you don't create the joiner instance. You typically create a new instance of something and then sign up for something at the same time. So let me break it down. Let's say if you have like a dog, a walk, and a human. I mean, you might create the walk here, but what if instead it asked us to create a new dog and assign it to a human that walks it, right? So the walk is the joiner between the dog and the human. So now we're on dog form, and we have to create a dog, and then we have a drop down of the human we want to assign it to. Does that make sense?
So you're just saying hypothetically we're not creating. Right now, we were tasked with creating a joiner table and things to have having to do with that. You're saying hypothetically, it could have asked us to create suite.
Yes, and then assign it to a vendor.
And then assign it to a vendor.
Right. So here so this is just something to think about, right? So since we're here suite, and then we have vendor suite, and then we have vendor, we're being asked to create the joiner, right? And that requires, well, three things. We only need the stuff. All we need to do to create this is we need the suite ID associated with it, the vendor, and then we have the price. So those are the three things. So the form's pretty easy. However, what if we wanted to create a dog and they say create a dog and assign that dog to a human? Well, with that type of ask, they're not asking for us to create one instance. They're asking us for actually to create two instances, right? To fulfill that, we have to create the dog instance, but we also have to create a walk instance to assign it, to link it to a human. Does that make sense?
I understand what you're saying, but I'm having trouble conceptualizing it in the brain.
Yeah, so the question is like, okay, you might see something that they, instead of asking you to create a joiner, they might ask you to create this and assign it to the opposite side, like to create the dog instance, and also you would then have to create a walk instance, right? And do it all in one form. And it becomes a little more difficult because form 4s, you might have to name things a little bit in a different way. So let's go through, after we'll create this, and then we'll go and we'll create a suite and then assign it to a vendor just to show the differences, okay? That might be the best bet for this. So let's go through and we'll do the collection select, f.collection select. And this is going to be what? What does a collection select take? Well, it takes 4 arguments. If it's called on the form, which it is, it's being called on f, which is this form, it takes 4 arguments. The first argument is, what do you want the key of the thing when it is created? And I'm going to go through these quickly, and then we'll dig down into them deeper. So this is what? This is going to be for the vendor. So vendor ID. What do you want to iterate over? Vendor.all. However, what are we doing here? We're breaking convention. So that probably tells me, and it's fine if you break convention in the code challenge a little bit. Not going to knock you a lot. But that tells me, okay, let's just have it done here instead. Vendors equals vendor.all. So I can just call at vendors. Next thing is, what do you want to pass as the value? I want to pass the ID, and what do you want the user to see as the last thing, right? Went through them fast. Let's dig into it. Let's break it down. So I had this thing. It looks like it works, and it does work. But let's inspect the actual form. And so when we get down here to this collection select, I see this name equals vendor suite colon vendor ID. All right. So that tells me it's in the params hash. When this gets sent forward, it's going to be the params hash. There's going to be a key called vendor suite. And inside the vendor suite hash, there's going to be a key called vendor ID. And that is, its value will be whatever value this is. So let's take a look at the first thing. If I change this instead of vendor ID, let's change it to suite ID. And we refresh the form. What happens here? Did you notice that this is now suite ID coming in? This is the name of the key inside the vendor suite hash is going to be suite ID. You guys see that? Thumbs up, thumbs down. Okay.
I see.
So if I change this to price, this is basically what I want the key inside of that vendor suite hash to be called. If I change it to price, I get price here. So that's what that first argument is doing. What do I want the key to be called? If I change it to Nick, I think I'll get an error because it's going to say there's not a Nick. Ooh, look at that. Undefined method Nick for vendor suite. So I try to assign it this key value of something that doesn't actually exist on a vendor suite. So let's go back, and this is going to be the vendor ID, right? Now, here's a key difference, though. I'm calling this collection select on F. If I just have it naked by itself, then the collection select actually takes 5 arguments. And what I mean by that, if I call it f.collection select, if I look at this form, this vendor suite, this outside key inside the params hash, is actually being provided from me because it knows I'm calling it on this form. And what's this form about? It's about the vendor suite, right? So if I don't call it here, I'll probably break it because I'll need to provide another argument. Indeed I do. And if I say something like dog, I don't know if I might break it here, but let's see. Oh, I didn't. But look what happened. Dog vendor ID. Cool. They have a little comment chat box. Yeah, yes. Oh, okay. I assume you guys are celebrating that. Like, oh, I see it now. But yeah, so a true collection select, not attached to a form, takes 5 arguments. The first argument is the thing that's going to be the key inside the params hash that you're going to pass that information through. The second argument is going to be the key name inside of that hash, right? So if the first argument is the dog key, its value will be a hash, and that hash will have a key name of the second argument. So I think we got these first 2 done. I'm going to put this back on f dot and not pass it 5 because it will implicitly pass me the first argument, right? And because, again, it's on this form that's a vendor suite, it knows that that key is vendor suite here. And we already said that this one is the name of the key inside of that other hash. Okay, so what is this? Well, this is the thing you're iterating over. At vendors, if I change this to suite.all, these now are suites, right? So the third argument in the f.collection select, the second argument in the f.collection select, third in just the plain collection select, is going to be the thing you're iterating over. So like vendor.all, which we set it to a variable at vendors. The fourth argument here is what you want to pass through as the value to this key that lives inside of the hash vendor suite. So what is the value of what you're going to pass forward in the key? So right now we had said we have params, and params will contain a key called vendor suite that is being created implicitly because we're calling it an f.collection select. If we don't call it on this, we have to state it explicitly ourselves, whatever we want it to be, Nick. If I put it as Nick here, that means params is going to contain a key called Nick, and its value, it's going to be a hash, and its value will have a key of this. I have that backwards. And this value will be whatever we list here. So that will be the value. Let's take this off and let's say it's on the f dot. So that means this won't be Nick. This will be this thing up here, vendor suite, because it will do it for us. And we're saying we're going to pass this params hash, and this value right here, this is going to be, we get to dictate what this is by this third argument in the f.collection select. So if we say ID, I'm going to cut this so I don't have an error. If we say ID and we refresh the page and we look at the value, it says 8, 9, 10. These are the IDs, right? And so if that's what it is, and we select the one which value is 8, our params hash coming through will look like this, right? If I change this to name, and I refresh the page, and I look at the options, its value is now cookies and cream, Carvel, Gregory's Coffee. So if I click Carvel, my params hash coming through to my backend will look like this, right? I want to send the ID. You always want to send the ID, and the reason for that, you could send the name, and you could search and iterate over all of them and find the one that matches the name Carvel. But what happens if we have 2 vendors with the same name Carvel? We're only ever going to find that first one. If we pass the ID, we're guaranteed to always find the one we're talking about that the user picks. So you always want to send the ID. All right, so this last argument here, name, what does that do? Well, this is just what the user sees. So if I change this to the string Nick, it won't do that. If I change this to price, then the user selects, what, do I miss a comma? Undefined method price. Yeah, okay, because there's no price on a vendor. A vendor has just a name and an ID. We don't have any other things. So I just change it. I just change it to name.
Did you change it to the ID?
ID. Yeah, I changed it to the ID. And you see that this is what the user sees, what they select from. And ID doesn't make sense because they don't really know what this means. So that would be name here. And that's what those arguments are. So for, if you're calling the collection select on the form, so the f.collection select, you have for. If you call it naked by itself, you have to state what you want the outer, you have to state what you want this outer key to be called. So you have to have 5 arguments. If I say Nick here, then this won't be called vendor suite, it will be called Nick. So we'll cover that again when we move over to the other form that we create, but that's what the collection select is breaking down, right? So I have that collection select for the cookies. No, sorry, this is for the vendor, and now let's do the same. We got to have another collection select for the suites. So I change this to suite at suites, which we don't have a variable created yet, so I'm going to go create one. Where did it go? And ID, and I think ID and name, because I want to pass the ID, and a suite does have a name indeed, as same thing with the vendor. So I look here now, and now I have that. Now I have all the information necessary to create a vendor suite. I have the price, I have the vendor, and I have the suite. And this is going to pass forth the vendor ID. This would pass me forth the suite ID. Any questions yet? No questions? All right. So let's move on. So I have this form. If I hit submit, I think we all know now it's going to look for a create method in my vendor suite controller. Right? So that's the next step. Let's just go and say def create, and I'm just going to put a by bug in here because I love debugging. Makes me feel good. I want to make sure that I'm passing all of the information from the front end to the back end that is necessary to create a vendor suite. So I'm going to start this with the by bug. I'm going to refresh this page to load in the new code. I'm going to say 50 insomnia cookies and peanut butter ice cream. I hit the by bug, I go to my terminal, and I'm here. And now I can look at params. And I have this whole hash, right? It's kind of hard to see, but I see in this hash, I have some interesting stuff. And I might even, let's just cut this one out to make it more readable and paste it here, just to break down what we are truly dealing with in this params hash. I have this key value pair, which is a bunch of nonsense to me. I don't really care about. I have this key value pair, which more nonsense. But look at this. I have this key value pair, and then I have this one, and this one. Of these, the only things I care about, the only key value pairs I care about, the only one I care about right now is this, right? This vendor suite key value pair. Again, remember, I even told you this is what I was going to have this params hash. It looks something like this. I don't really care about the authenticity token to create this stuff right now. I don't care about this commit. I don't care about the controller or the action or the UTF-8. I just care about this, is what I built, right? And it has all of the information I need to create a vendor suite. I have the price, I have the vendor ID, and I have the suite ID. And we know how to access that, right? Params, vendor suite, price. Params, vendor suite, vendor ID. Params, vendor suite, suite ID. We know how to get that stuff out of there. But the question is, what happens if a user, some malicious actor, actually sends an additional key value pair in here? money. So let's say we're not dealing with let's just say coupon promo, all free, right? That doesn't really make sense. But what if they add this in here? And what if I try to create a vendor suite? When I say vendor suite dot create, and if I was just to pass in params vendor suite, if I just pass that in, then it would create a vendor suite passing in a price key value pair, a vendor suite one, a suite ID, and a promo one. Which we might not have a promo thing in here, but what if we're not dealing with vendor suite? What if we're dealing with a bank account, right? And they don't ask for price and all this. They ask for name, so like Nick, social security number, social. So my social security number, let's just say it was 7, and that was it. But what if I'm malicious enough to know, oh, I know this bank, I know the inner workings, and I know that the bank account also has a column called balance that when they create new accounts, it gets initiated with a balance of 0 by default. But if I find a way to pass a key value pair of balance, and I set it to $1 million, right? When they create my bank account, and if they just pass in params, and let's call this bank, right? Let's change this to bank. If they just pass this in and they create it, it's going to create an instance of a bank account for me with $1 million in it, right? Like already by default. And that's not very secure. And so to combat that, we as developers have this method that we label as private, and we called it generically strong params. And the convention of strong params is to name the method. It's just a Ruby method. We just name it the thing. Vendor suite underscore params. So thing underscore params. So vendor suite underscore, and just put a params at the end. And all this method does is return a value to us that we can call on the params hash, right? So if I say params, it's just going to give me this whole params hash, and then I can make this secure by saying, okay, I'm going to require that there is a bank key inside the params hash. So I call the method require, and I say bank, and it's saying in this whole thing that is a params hash, require that there is a bank key there. And then we use a method called permit that says in that bank key, the value, I will permit the following and only the following values. I will permit name, I will permit soc, and that is it. I'm only permitting these key value pairs. And what this does, so then if I create a bank account, instead of passing in blindly trusting my params are good, I can instead call the method vendor suite params, and its return value will be a hash which looks to access this bank key and only returns me the values of these key value pairs that I supply. So if I say this, no matter if they send me balance equals $1 million, this will get blocked by this whole statement, and I will just create a bank account with the name of Nick and a soc of 7. Did that make sense to everyone? Did you guys follow along to what strong params are for? And just to know that it's just a Ruby method that we build. This is just a method, and this is just us referencing the params, which is this, and calling .require on it, and then calling .permit on it. We're stringing two methods together. No difference if I said like params.length or something like that. How do you guys feel about that? So,
Pretty good.
okay, yeah, pretty good. Okay, so let's change this. We're not dealing with banks. We're dealing with what? We had said our params name is vendor suite, right? It's this thing, and its vendor suite was the key that we require. So our strong params will require a key called vendor suite. And what are the 3 things we want to permit? We want to permit a vendor ID, right? The 3 things required to make this: a suite ID and a price. That's it. That's all we're going to permit. So let's run this now, and I'm just going to continue out of this, and then I'm going to go back. I'm going to refresh my page to new, refresh, 44, create. We hit the buy bug again. So let's look at, okay, I have my param still, right? I have my params, but I also have access to this method called vendor suite params, and I can call this method in here too, vendor suite params. And this returns me a hash of these things. So if I do this instead, and I can even pull this out, right? If I just call that, I'm just saying params.require, do the same things. It returns me vendor suite ID price ID. So if I paste this, and let's just say I take price out of here, so it accesses the params hash. It requires this. Its return value should only give me a hash with vendor ID and suite ID. And indeed, its return value hash just has these two things. If I even take suite ID out there, I should just get a hash of only vendor ID, key value pair. So does that kind of help to demystify what these strong params are doing, right? Strong params isn't the name of this method. It's just a conventional name we use to call this private method we build ourselves to limit the key value pairs that we use for the create method to what we want them to be. So now that I know I have my strong param set up, I can go ahead and I can create my vendor suite. And what's necessary to create a vendor suite? Vendor ID, suite ID, price. So I can just say vendor suite.create and just pass in this method, because this method will return a hash that has these key value pairs. So it's just like me passing in a hash of these key value pairs. Cool. And we might not always know, like, this is like a no error thing, right? This is us assuming, we're optimistically thinking that this will be created, but let's be a little more pessimistic. Let's change this instead of from a create, which is, create is a new method combined with a save method. Let's break it up and just say .new, and then we can put a conditional and say if, and then we can set this to a variable. So at vendor suite equals, and we can say if vendor suite dot save, right? Because this dot save returns a value, true or false. And to show you what I mean, let's do this. Let's comment this line out. Let's put a buy bug here. So we have vendor suite available to us on that create. We're continued there. Let's go back to our console, hit back. Let's go to forward. Let's refresh. We hit our buy bug. And now we can say, okay, I have vendor suite now, right? Because I'm right here in my program. I've already created at vendor suite. It's this thing. It's new, right? I don't have an ID because I haven't tried to persist in my database. I haven't tried to save it in my database. I just called .new, which creates it all. So I have vendor ID, a suite ID, a price. I don't have created at or updated at because I haven't done anything with my database. I can say, if I call .save on here, if it saves, it will save it and it returns a Boolean. So it will try and save it and then return a Boolean. If it successfully saves, it returns the Boolean true. And I just created a vendor suite. If it doesn't save, it doesn't save anything and it returns a Boolean false. So if I make my conditional saying if at vendor suite.save, even though this is part of conditional, this is still a method I'm running. So it's still attempting to save it to the database. And in this case it does. So this will be true, right? This will equal to true. And if this does run, then we can do this stuff. We can redirect. I think it told us in the instructions to redirect to the suites page, right? And we can use a Rails path helper for that. The suite page would be suite_path and pass in the suite. What is the suite? Well, let's use active record in those methods here. Vendor suite dot suite, because a suite belongs to a vendor suite belongs to a suite. So I can redirect to that. Else, if it doesn't save, we'll just put puts oh no, right, for right now. Now a question is, okay, well how did we get here? Well, let's look at Rails routes. And a good thing is, in Rails routes, all we have to do if we forget what it is, just remember Rails routes. And we can look at all the routes we have for Rails. And we get this nice little printout. On some of your guys' terminals, I don't think it looks as pretty, but here on mine, it looks pretty. So we can see all of these things that are prefixes, this left-hand column over here, all of this is like your Rails path helper. And to use this, all you would have to do is put underscore path in front of it, and you would get this URL. And I say that if one thing to look for, if the URL has a variable or has like a colon ID, that means that you have to specify what this value is. So you have to pass this method a variable, right? And you can try this out in the console by calling these methods on app. So if I say app, and for instance, I'm saying, well, I have this prefix vendor suites, and it's telling me it's a get for the index. So I should expect if I use the vendor underscore suites underscore path, it should give me the URL, which it would take me, hit the index page, or excuse me, hit the index method of the vendor suites. So vendor underscore suites, and does this here, this whole line, does the URI have a variable in it? Does it have a colon, anything? No, so I don't need to pass it anything. So I can just call it here. Did I spell something wrong? Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. The other thing is, all of these prefixes, you would have to put underscore path at the end of them. You just have to tag that underscore path, right, for them to work. And then I get / vendor suites. So that's the URL for my get to go to all my index of vendor suites. And for here, we want to redirect to the suite path, right? And that sounds weird to say out loud. And I look, and do I have a path that is just suite, a show page, right, to that particular suite? And honestly, I'm not seeing that. All I have is I have suites is right here, and all I have is an index. So I can call app.suites path, and that should give me the URL to get the index, but I don't have app.suite path. It's going to say like no how undefined method, right? Because all these are methods, and that tells me I have to set up the route. Because if you look, I only have to suites and to vendors. So if I want to do that, I can just manually set it up, or I could always just fall back on my resources, but I'll just manually do it and say suites ID. And this would take me to not the index, but the show. Right? But maybe I'm feeling lazy, and I'm like, screw it. I don't have time to fine tune this. I just want to give all 7 routes to each of my things here, and I can just give it on resources, right? Vendor and suites. And you notice that these are plural. Suites with an S, vendors with an S, vendor suites with an S. So I just did this. I just saved it. I had my resources, this Rails method, I'm using resources. So if I exit here and I call Rails routes now, let's see what routes I have available. I have a lot more, right? I have all 7 for each of them. So now if I look at my suite, I have a suites path, right, to my show. This is to my show, suites controller, show method, and it's suites : ID, right? And it's just suite. To use that then, I would have to call app.suite underscore path, and because it has a : ID, I need to pass it an argument. So let's go in the Rails console, let's try it out. App.suite underscore path, and I just will pass it 45 for now. I did not put a period, I put a slash. And then I get suites / 45. So that's telling me that will work, right? And so if you are confused about why in the controller, if we want to go to the suites path, then we can use that suite underscore path helper, and then all we have to do is pass it the suite ID. And I know I have a vendor created, and I know a vendor belongs to a suite, so I can use that vendor, that .suite method on my vendor suite instance. So that's a lot of words. We just did a bunch. Now let's go test it out. So if I refresh this and I say 100 and I hit, I take out my buy bug, so I have to refresh again. Oh, I don't have it in there. So I should be able to hit create vendor. All right, and it says undefined method redirect for, did you mean redirect to? Yeah, I did. Thank you, Rails, for being so helpful, because I used something that doesn't actually exist. I want to use a redirect to. So let's go back. Let's say 100, create. Oh, another error. Okay, well, let's look what happened. It's saying the action show cannot be found for the Sweets controller. Neat. But look, it took me to Sweets/7. So this is telling me what? Anyone want to volunteer?
Well, you're at the where the page would be for the suite with the ID of 7. It can't show you anything though because you don't have the show view up for suites.
Yeah, not even the show view. I just don't even actually even have a show method, right? So I put a show in here. Let's see that we want. Then also we'll have. Let's try that. So now if I hit refresh, now I get this missing template. Don't have a view. That takes me to the next thing. So I go to my suites and I make a show. And I'm just going to do an H1 that says suite show. And I've hit that, right? It doesn't have any information, but I'm at suites 7, suite show. So maybe I want to display some info about that particular suite. So to do so, I would have to go to my controller and then use params in the URL, right? Instead of variable. Suite equals suite.find params ID. Because I have this ID up here that's being passed in the get, and I can use this to find that suite, and then I can go into my show and I can display some information. So I can say, let's put it in H1. We'll use an H3 and say at suite.name, and there we go. Cool. Now we can also say, okay, well, let's display all the vendors for that particular suite. All right, so at suite.vendors, right? We're using active record here. Each of these will be a vendor. And then I can, in a p tag for each of these, I just will put it in here, and I will say vendor.name, right? This is, I'm getting vendor from here. Vendor.name. Oh wow, look at, that's all the vendors that have that. And I have a few, because I've created a few with Insomnia cookies, so I have repeats. But it'd be cool if I clicked this and it took me to their page. Oh, okay, well let's make this a link to. Link to takes 2 arguments. The first is what you want the text to say. The second is what the path is. In the path, again, we can use these Rails helpers, right? I can use this vendor path and pass in a vendor instance, which is this here, to take me there. And so if I hover over these now, I see this would take me to vendor/8, vendor/9, vendor/10, vendor/7. I click them, I get an issue. Action show cannot be found for vendors controller. This is getting repetitive because we're kind of doing the same thing on the opposite end, right? So let's go and do that. We're in the vendors controller now. We don't have, that's the vendors model. We don't have a show, so def show. And I know I'm going to have to find my vendor by the params, just like we did with the suite. At vendor equals vendor.find params ID. I also know I probably don't have a show page here. Indeed, I don't. So I'll create a show.html.erb h1 show vendor show. And you know what? I'm getting real lazy. I might just go and say this is probably all mostly boilerplate. I might have to make some changes. Instead of a suite, I'm dealing with a vendor. Instead of a vendor here, I'm dealing with a suite. Refresh, And no. Let's see. At suite.name. I went too fast. I'm in a vendor, so I might have named this. I named that suite. Sorry, this is vendor because I changed it as I hit too many of them, which has its downfalls. So vendor.name, vendors dot suites. I want here, right? Dot each. Suite.name, suite.path, suite. Okay. Cool. So now I have these links back and forth. That was fast. Kind of on purpose. Questions so far? All right, let's try and get 2 more things done tonight. I'm going to work on another form for a suite where we add it to a vendor, and then we're going to quickly go on some validations. And I think that will be good to wrap up with for the rest of the night. So first, let's move towards the form, right? So we want to create a new form here. We said someone rejoined. So I want to create new here, right? So a new view. And I know I'm going to also have to create, this is in my suites. I'm going to have to create a new method in here. This isn't new. This is, I keep using the word new because we're working on new. This isn't new stuff, right? We just did this earlier today. And then I'm going to have to do the same thing like in my vendor suites and create a new instance, right? So we're working with suites. So at suite equals suite.new. And I know my routes are good because I gave resources to all of them. So I'm good on that side. And I will just put an H1 here that says create a new suite and assign to a vendor. And let's go there. So suites/new. And we hit that here. So we're all set up. So we can create our form. So we go to do this form for at suite do f. And I'll do the easy gimmies, f.submit. And what does a suite need to be? What do we need to submit? Let me rephrase. What attributes does a suite need to be created? What do you guys think? What information does the user need to provide to create a suite?
A name?
Yeah, just the name. It just needs a name. But we have to do 2 things here. We have to create a suite, and then we have to assign that suite to a vendor, which we know enough about programming with Rails and with Ruby to know, in object-oriented programming, to know that means if we want to assign a suite to a vendor, that means we have to create a joiner instance, linking that suite to a vendor. So we don't just have to create a suite, we also have to create a vendor suite. And what are the pieces of information necessary to create a vendor suite? Vendor ID, suite ID, and a price. Right? So we need to have a form where the user fills out this information coming through. Name. So I'm just going to copy this over and paste this in my form for right now, just so I can reference it. So let's work on the name first. Okay. f.label, and this is going to be name. f.text field, right? Because we want them to type it, and name. All right, so we're good there. Let's see how that's looking. All right, cool. Let's inspect that form, and we see this form has this input here, and this is the input for that coming through, right? And if you look, the name is suite : square brackets name, and its value will be whatever the user types in. But we know that this is going to come in the params hash in a suite, under a suite key. And the value for this input will be in that suite key under a name key. Does that make sense? Or do you guys want to see that in action? Let's see it in action. Big cookie. I'm actually going to have to retype that because I know I'm going to hit a create in my suites controller. So I got to have a create field. And first thing is I'm going to just put my bybug in here and see what I have coming from the front end to the back end. I'm going to refresh this to load it in. Big cookie. I should hit big coolie. There we go. And I should hit that bybug. And indeed I do. And I can look at what are the params. Oh, look at, I have this key called suite. And in there, this value is a hash that has a key value pair. Name, big coolie, right? There's where the key name came from on the outside inside the params hash. Here's where the name key came from inside the suite hash. And its value is whatever the user types in, which is big coolie here. So we have that piece of information coming through. So we actually have all the things necessary to create a suite right now, right? And so let's go and do that then. Let's set up what we do have. So again, I want to probably use strong params, right? And so I'm just going to copy this over as a template because I don't want them sending anything more. And this is a suite we're creating. So I'm going to change this to suite params. It's not vendor suite is the outside one. It's going to be suite, right? It's the thing we're dealing with here, suite. And we want to permit what? Well, all we want to permit is a name. That's all we need to create a suite. And so now in my create, I can say at suite equals suite dot new suite params. And this will actually create a suite for me. That's everything, right? We'll create a suite here. And we can even say if, and then well, this won't create one. We'll have to save it. If at suite dot save. Let's redirect to that show page. Redirect to suite path at suite. Else, oh no. Right, we won't work on errors tonight. I think we'll run on time. So let's work with this right here. Let's see what happens. Let's refresh. Let's exit our bybug. Let's refresh. Big cookie. Look at that. We went to /suites/13. We created our big cookie, right? But you'll notice if I go to suites like /10, like it has the vendor it's associated with, but Big Cookie doesn't because we actually don't have any. It has no associations to a vendor. It's just a freestanding cookie. So in order to fulfill the expectations of what we were asked to create, which was create a suite and assign it to a vendor, we have to do that second part here, right? We have to create our vendor suite instance to cover all those bases. Interesting. Okay. Well, we do so in the same form. So in this form for a suite, we actually need to ask for additional information outside of the vendor suite. We have everything needed to create outside of the suite. We have everything needed to create a suite, which is just the name, but we actually also have to pass through vendor suite information. And what is that required to create a vendor suite? Well, we've actually done that right here. So we can save some time because we know all this will be the information required to create that. I'm just going to copy that and I'm going to paste it in my suite form. And I'm going to see what happens. And I'm assuming what happens probably won't be pretty, but we're going to see. So if I go to suites/new, I get an error, right? I get an error saying undefined method for suite, undefined method price for a suite instance. So what's happening here, this can be very frustrating because it doesn't give you a ton of information and it's confusing. It's a confusing error. This is where Rails can hurt a little bit. Rails is trying to do so much for you. Like Rails with its helpers is trying to do so much here. It's saying, you're trying to create this suite, and I have this whole system in place to cleanly let you just type in name, and I'm going to send that through as suite and under suite brackets name here for this input, right? But then you're passing the stuff that has nothing to do with the suite. Like there's not a price column in the suite table. There's not a vendor ID column in the suite table. There's not a suite ID column in the suite table. Like, what are you trying to do here? And the way to get around this is, well, we just can't call this on the f dot, right? We have to have these just kind of naked hanging out, because this f dot is saying this is being called on this form, this f, right? And I can even say form, so it'd be form dot collection select, and we can't call it on that because this form is for an at suite. It's for a suite instance. So if we take those off here, let's refresh the page. We might still have issues, honestly. We had this, okay, yeah, so our label's kind of like flimsy at this point. So I think what we'll have to do here is list what we want, an extra step. What do we have this label, just like we did in collection select, what do we want the key to be called? And honestly, I haven't done this much. I'm just making assumptions, and we'll try it out. I think it's saying you need to pass a second argument. Yeah, it's expecting 2 to 4 and saying you want the inner key to be called price. What do you want the outer key to be called? So for all of this, what is this dealing with?
The vendor suite?
Vendor suite. So what if we say vendor suite? If we want the outer key to be called vendor suite. So if I save this, I'll still get an error, but hopefully it moves away from this and it goes down to here. Ooh, cool. That makes me feel, yeah, it makes me feel pretty good. So that means I just can copy this down to here. Not that. And let's see now. Now it's on to my collection select. And again, remember when we talked about with the first form, if we have the naked collection select, that means we have to specify, just like we did here, and just like we did here, what the outer key in the params hash is going to be called. And we, again, have decided we want to call it vendor suite. We have 5 arguments, not 4. Because we can't use the implicit calling that Rails provides with the form 4, because none of this highlighted stuff is for a suite, and it's going to throw an error if you don't specify that additional argument at the front. So if we refresh, we should have no errors. We have an error. Did I spell something wrong? Undefined.
No, the map is undefined.
Oh yeah, because I have these at vendors at suites. I don't have them. I don't know what an at vendor is because I don't have it. I don't have that in my controller, right? Like in my vendor suites, I define these, so I just also
add those into
exactly into my suites controller in my new. And now I should have no error. Boom, beautiful, right? This is great to see, and we've hopefully demystified some of those very confusing Rails errors, where Rails is trying to do so much, it becomes kind of a nuisance. So now, if I pass this in, let's look at my create method. I'm just going to put a buy bug, because I love to start with a buy bug, and I would suggest you guys do as well. Let's refresh. Let's just say small cookie. Its price is going to be 100. Let's just put 100 here. Gregory's Coffee and their M&Ms. Oh, well, hang on. Seems like I have too much information, right? Who knows who can catch what's unnecessary?
the suites collection.
Yeah, because we're creating a suite right now, right? So we don't need to provide it the suite it's linked to because we haven't created it yet. So I can take this selection collection select away from the suites. I don't actually need that. And I refresh, and that looks better, right? Small cookie. Price is 100, and this is going to be Gregory's Coffee. And I hit create, and I hit my buy button. And let's switch over to the controller for my suites. All right. What do we have in chat? The M&M. Ah, yes. So now we look. Do we have every piece of information we need? So if I look at my params, what do I need? I need 4 things, right? I need the name of the cookie to create the suite, which we already know we can create the suite. But in the vendor suite, I need the price, I need the vendor, and I need the suite ID. Well, how do I get the suite ID now? If I have all the information to create a suite, couldn't I just create that suite and then use that suite as my suite ID? What do you guys think?
Well, yeah, because that's when it's not going to get a suite ID until you've created the suite.
Exactly, that's the point. I don't need the suite ID because I just need the information to create a suite, and then I can use that suite I then create for that ID to make that connection. So I indeed do have everything I need to create both a suite and a vendor suite. So let's go and do that. So I know with my suite I have strong params. The thing is though, like strong params doesn't really. I have suite params. I can create another thing of params here if I want def. If I want to be really secure, I can create def suite vendor suite params. I think that's kind of outside the scope of what we're asking you guys. I think here we can just access the parameters by itself. We still have access to the params hash, right? So I can create my suite. I can then create my vendor suite, right? So I can say at vendor suite equals, set a variable, a vendor suite equals vendor suite dot create, or let's just say dot new, and then I need price. My price here is, again, I can access the params hash. I have this key in my params hash called vendor suite that I used, right? I named it that in my new here because I call this vendor suite and this vendor suite and this vendor suite. Not so much the label, but these two. So params, let's look back here. This is params, this whole hash, vendor suite key. I don't know what I just clicked and dragged. Vendor suite key gives me this hash. It contains price and vendor ID. So price equals params vendor suite, and then I access the price here, like that. Right? And same thing here. Vendor suite, I can do price vendor suite vendor ID, or I could just pass the whole hash of params vendor suite because it just has params vendor suite will give me this hash. Right? It's the same as me just passing this as a hash. Price and vendor ID, right? And that whole thing to access that is just params. You can do either one, right? This is just kind of saves some writing. Vendor suite. So my vendor suite right now has what? Let's put a buy bug. Let's take this one out. Let's continue here. Let's go back and let's refresh. And let's say extra small cookie, and for some reason this is like homeopathy where like the smaller it gets the more expensive it gets. Oh, we get a forbidden attributes error. Vendor suite, let me see, params vendor, did I spell something wrong? No. I might not be able to mass assign. I think that's what it's doing. So forget the shortcut it said. I think we'll have to do this way. I think it won't allow me to mass assign. It's kind of trying to hint me towards strong params. So I can say params price, and then I think the other was vendor ID, and I can then say params vendor suite, and it was vendor ID. Let's try that again. So let's put in a buy bug here. Let's continue out of the one we're in. Let's go back. Let's refresh the page. very small cookie. Tribeca treats. Create. We hit the buy bug. Well, let's see what we have then. Let's get my code in the background. And now we look at, like, we have at suite. What's at vendor suite look like? Oh, cool. Look at I had this instance. It's not been saved in the database or tried to yet, but it has a vendor ID of 12. It has a suite ID of nil. It has a price of this 100,000. So how do I assign the suite ID to this? How do I get, what do I do? What is the suite ID I want to assign? Let's start there.
Well, it's whatever's. The suite ID doesn't get assigned until it's created. So,
Yeah, so we don't have it. Good point. I actually forgot. I mean, I didn't forget this. Yes, we don't have it, so we have to change our code, right? So maybe we can move this here, and then we have this conditional if at suite is saved. Then we can create this at vendor suite, right? And we can, and this might be hard to read, so I might just do this. Params, and we know what the additional argument is, right? We have a suite ID, and if this says we know that at suite has a suite ID, so we can just call that right there, right? I think this is good here. We can also check and say if at vendor suite as well. We can even nest this. I wouldn't worry too much about it. I would just go here. So if we can save this, then we can create our vendor suite ID. And if we can save this here, we can create our vendor suite and we can pass it for the suite ID, the at suite.id, and then redirect to that path. So let's remove all buy bugs. Let's try and create one, and let's see where we are. And we made it to the tiny crumb. Ooh, this is telling me, did we actually create it the way we wanted to? Maybe I should have had that in there. Let's see what happens here. Did we get a rollback?
well, we can see it has an ID in the link.
Oh, I know the suite's created,
Yeah.
but the vendor suite I'm not seeing here. Suites here, select. All right, so let's just do this. Let's put this buy bug here. Let's go back and let's create another one. And let's look at our code in the background and let's see what is at vendor suite. Does it have an ID? Ooh, it's nil. It does have a price. It has a suite ID. It has a vendor ID. So if we call vendor suite, oh, I see what it is. Do you see what happened? You see what the issue is?
Well, we haven't yet created.
Yeah, we never actually call it create. We can just change that new to create here. We didn't try and save it or call create. I still have the new left there. So that's why it wasn't creating. And just here, if I wanted to try this, I can say .save, and I get true, so I know it would all work out. So let's continue out of this. And then let's go back. There we go. Cool, and everything works good. So quickly, I mean, just to kind of sum that up, do you now see Daniel and then everyone else that is on mute? Do you guys see the difference between being asked to create just a joiner or being asked to create one thing and linking it and having to create that class and its associated joiner?
Yeah, as the difference is I don't want to do it tomorrow.
But I will probably say you may, I mean, I don't know for certain what the one tomorrow looks like. I'll have to still pick it. But you may have to do something where we just did what we did, right? And the key difference is know that if you have to create something and associate it as you create it, then you have to pass in information for both that class or that instance and its joiner instance as well. And if you're doing that in a form and you're using the f dot, then for the things that don't pertain to that thing you're creating, for like suite for instance, you won't be able to call f dot on there, and you'll have to pass in the additional argument up front of what you want that key to be called. And then when you create things here, you'll have suites controller, you'll have to create, you know, the one first and then create the second, passing in the ID. All right, we have a comment. Let's see. There was a missing link in my knowledge. Thanks. Oh yeah, I'm glad to hear it, Alex. Yeah, it can be very hard. Like, it's mystifying to me. I mean, it is to me on some of this stuff until I dig into it and practice with it. Of what is each thing actually doing? Because sometimes it's very easy to jump into Rails and be like, okay, I don't know what this does, but I know it needs to be there, right? And you move forward. But if you don't know what it does or why it needs to be there, you won't know when it gives you issues of what's happening. And this kind of help hopefully look at those arguments and demystify some of that. I have to go to the bathroom in a major way, but let's take 10 minutes here really quickly and go over some validations. We're just going to say off the bat, validations, we're going to make sure that when a suite is created, it has a price that is less than 100 and a unique, and it has a name. All right. So to do so, those are two different things. One of it, let's not say less than 100. Let's say it has when a suite is created, it has a name, and when a cookie, when a suite is created, it has a unique name, and when a vendor suite is created, it has a price. Those are the two validations we'll go over. So let's go to Rails validations. And validations are pretty nice because there's some great documentation. It's honestly not hard to implement them. So one of those things is, let's tackle the first one. It has a price. So a price is there. A price is present. So as we look through these validations, there's some you'll get comfortable with. And one is presence, right? Presence is true. And all we have to do here is copy this, validates, and this is going to be the price is under a vendor suite. So we go to the controller and we just put, this is, vendor suite.
It's not the controller.
The model, thank you. We're in the model and we can list that method validates, and it's not order. This first argument is what you want to validate. And we're validating the price. The price table has a presence that is true. And that's it. We're good. Let's test that out. So let's try to create a vendor suite. Vendor suite here. And now we have this else thing, right? So we should, in theory, get oh no puts out in the table. I don't really like that. I'll just put a buy bug. So if we hit the buy bug, we know we have failed this validation. So let's go to create a vendor suite. Not put in a price. Okay, I'll be done like 15.
15. Well, I'm gonna eat that.
All right. Not put in a price. And we hit the buy bug. So we know we failed that validation, right? And we have this at vendor. We can even call it at vendor dot errors to get the errors. Sorry, it's a vendor suite. And that's hard to read. There's a message. There's even another method we can call on dot errors, and that's full messages. And it prints it out nicely. And it even tells us, look, a price can't be blank. And that's actually pretty good information for a user to know. So we can take that and use our flash hash and create something called errors. Create a key in the flash hash called errors. And if you remember, the flash hash is something that lives just from one route to the next. It lives one route lifetime. And we can set this equal to our at vendor suite dot errors dot full messages. And what we can do here then, so, and then if this is true, we set the flash hash key of errors equal to that, and then we can redirect to our new, back to the new page, right? Which is vendor, we use our Rails helper, vendor suite underscore new path. I think it's vendor suites underscore new path. I'm asking the question, so I'm going to just double check, right? Vendor suite new. Oh, it's even new vendor suite. I was completely wrong. It's new vendor suite path. And it doesn't take an argument because it does not have a colon ID or colon anything in here. So that's it. So then we can do that. We can set this flash errors. Okay, well if they get redirected back to the new, that means that this form's going to re-render. So we can create a conditional here, it's this form. We can create a conditional here that says, all right, if you have flash, if you have a key, if you have a value associated with flash errors, so if flash errors is not set, it's just going to be nil, and nil is a faulty value, which will equate to false in Ruby. If there is an error, it will be a hash, and that's a truthy value, which will equate to truth, to true in Ruby. So we can say if flash errors, right, instead of just an if statement. If that is, then we can iterate over them, flash errors, which is, again, I mean, it's not a hash, it's an array, the value of this key in the flash hash. So we can call .each do, and each of these things is an error. We make our n, and let's just put them in a p tag and just list error, which is this, right? So now you should have this pretty friendly user readout. I think I'm still in my bybug. Let's continue out of it. Let's take it away in the code. Let's see if I have it left in there. I took it out. So let's go back. And now if I have an error, it should, if it does not save, it should hit this out statement, which sets a key of errors in the flash hash equal to this, this array of error messages. And then it redirects me back to the new page, which re-renders this new here, which this conditional always runs now, that if flash errors is a thing, iterate over them and put in a p tag each error. So let's try and create, and indeed now we have that error come up. And if I want to get super fancy with it, now that we have had a little bit of inline styling knowledge, I can say style equals color red. This is a little too much, but now I get this nice red color. That's a lot there. You might have to study that again by yourself, run it through after this if you're not familiar with validations. But that's validations both install. There's two parts. One is just the validation, which was very easy to do inside the model. The second part was the error handling, which is a little more complex. But now let's go through and put another validation, because we said we have price, but now we want to make sure that a suite cannot have the same name. So in here again, we would use the validates. And let's go to the documentation. And with things that are not being the same name, as we look down this list, what comes out at us? What do you see of things that have the same name? Uniqueness. Perfect, Alex. We have this uniqueness one, right? And it just, again, is this piece here. This gives you a scope. That's even probably a little too much. This is the more simple version if you don't want the extra options. And we can go in here and validate, not the email, but that the name has a uniqueness of true. And that's it. So now, if we go to suites and we try to create it, I imagine it won't. Let's go to our suites new. Okay, so if we look at the controller for suites, this else we just have oh no. Let's just copy some of this we have instead. Just want to retype. And if instead we want to go vendor, not suite, we just want suite.errors, because that's the only thing that we have for the conditional right now, .full messages, and then we can redirect not to vendor suite path, but to new suite path. And then the same thing that we have here for this type of conditional rendering, if there is an error, I think we can actually just copy wholesale and paste at the top of this as well. So now if I try to create a suite with the same name, I think I have one called Tiny Crumb. 3, create. I get that name has already been taken. And now we've been thinking here though too, right? We have this other error for, because right now I could refresh, and if I put in a name that's completely new, but I don't put a price, it still, oh, it creates it because I told it to. It creates the suite, but you could even do something here. This is getting in the weeds. Don't worry too much. It's not too much in the weeds, but for my suite here, I had this create as well. Let's say I do if suite.save, then we can put another one like if at vendor suite.new. I can make this new again, new, and then do another if statement. If at vendor suite dot save, then I redirect, then I do an else, and this is not very dry, it's fine, but I can do this here, right? So that's another thing I can do. Conversely, that's a lot, so I can make it more dry. Yes, this is being recorded. What I would probably do here, and again, if you want to hop off now, that's fine. I'm going to go over one last thing. What I'd probably do here to clean all this up is create my new here. Then I have this new, and then I just call create instead. And then I will do the same thing here for my vendor suite. Now that I've created it, I will say create here. And then I will say, if instead of save, I can call .valid, right? And then I can link this together and at vendor suite.valid. So I'll combine those with an and statement. So they both have to be true. Question mark. So if that is both true, then I can redirect to this. And then if it's not true, I can say flash errors equals this plus the vendor suite.full messages and then we can redirect to new suite path. And then I don't need any of this. So that's a little better, right? This is kind of lengthy, but it's fine. If I want to get past this, I can always just put like some type of variable that says vs equals params vendor suite. And then I can just say like vs.price. And then probably make this a one-liner. No, still multi-line. Whatever, that's fine. Well, yeah, that's fine. But I don't like it how it's all this, but this is essentially what we can do, right? So we can create this, we create this one, and if they're both valid, we know it's all good, else we go back and we have these errors. And so now if I try it, if I refresh the page and I have nothing, it gives me both. Oh, it should give me both errors. There we go, I didn't have it refreshed. So I get name has already been taken, suite must exist, price can't be blank. So that uniqueness is saying, that's running twice, right? So it's saying the name has already been taken on vendor suite, or on the suite. The suite must exist. This is a validation that is happening when I created my associations. There's a validation saying if I create a vendor suite, I have to create it with a actual suite, and that's provided through me from my in my schema, right? This is this here. It needs this to be created, so that's where that one is. This is automatically added when I did my migrations, and this is my price can't be blank. All right, that's a lot. Cover a lot. It was a ton. 2 hours almost running. Any last questions before we end for the night? The last 20 minutes, I wouldn't worry too much tomorrow. I just was kind of going off if you were curious. But that form aspect of it, I would practice that if you're worried about it tonight.
So the validate, because like I was trying to follow along and the wheels came off at the validation point for me. I got an error and I couldn't fix it last night. So that probably not. Don't need to worry about that if I want to be successful.
Well, you do want to try and have the error presented to the user, and it would probably just be one error.
So just like something simple like name can't.
Yeah, the first one we did with vendor suite where it just said price can't be blank. Like I would try and get this working tonight. This one error here that if I try to hit create, you get that price can't be blank.
Yeah, I don't know where my code moved up, but okay. All right.
All right, guys, I will end this here. I will post it right after. It'll probably take a while to upload. But yeah, I wish you all luck tomorrow.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I feel like I feel a little bit better about what I know now after having watched you do this.
Cool.
Personally. I mean, I feel like I understood what you were trying to do. So.
Yeah, and I would say there's different levels of it. The last thing to worry about is error rendering. If you don't get to error rendering, I think that's acceptable. So that's where you're stumped. You're completely lost, but you're still lost in other stuff. Spend the time on the things we went for the first hour and a half, hour 40 minutes.
Building a form.
Yeah, especially that form where you're not creating just the joiner class. Even though tomorrow you won't only be asked to create a joiner class, but I feel like there's a 50-50 chance where you might be asked to create the non-joiner as well as the joiner.
That's the second.
That was the second form part.
We did the street.
Yep. Where you had like the detached collection selects and text fields. Cool.
Thanks, Nick.
Yeah, thanks guys. It was great. It was a great time. I will end this call and then end the recording. And I wish you all the best of luck tomorrow and good luck studying tonight. Make sure you get some rest.
Can you be bribed?
Not at the moment.
Jet's Pizza, yes.
Not
okay,
while the camera's rolling. No, just kidding.
Oh shit.
I'll see you guys all later.
I have to go.